Bonjour, mes amis. I am hoping to clarify the difference between vintage, thrifting, and consignment. The three terms are often used interchangeably, and I can tell you that it is not. And not knowing that difference can lead to very, very awkward moments. And I'll share my experience, my very awkward moment towards the end. But I will start first with thrifting because thrifting, in my opinion, is the most common. When you think of thrifting, you think of Salvation Army, Family Plus, I think that's down south, Goodwill, things of that nature, pretty much charity shops. So with that, how the process goes, the donor just takes a bin, bag, trunk full of items and drop them in a bin. You don't receive cash. Depending on what country you're in, you will receive a tax form and you can write it off, things of that nature. But with that, the items are just received and put right on the floor. Unless an item is visibly soiled, there is no search and, let's see how this looks or if this would sell. The item is just taken from donation to the floor. They aren't washed, they aren't checked, nothing. And I have absolutely nothing against thrifting. I love thrifting. I'd say maybe 20% of my wardrobe is thrifted items. And with thrifting, it is a hunt. I love that hunt. With that hunt, I have found grand pieces, furs, vintage Yves Saint Laurent, even though it was at a thrift store, but we'll get to vintage. I have found really, really nice pieces at the thrift store. And because it is a charity shop, they typically aren't marked to make a tremendous profit. So pieces I have gotten from thrift stores, I'd say at the max, I've spent maybe $20 or so, but that's thrifting. So next is vintage. Vintage, I know this is going to be hard to process for a lot of us. I know it's hard for me to process. Vintage is technically anything 20 years prior. So we mes amis, items from 2000 is considered vintage now. Yes, I know it's so hard to believe. But when I use the term vintage, my subjective use of the term, I am referring to items like from the 70s or so. And I love those items. I love the items, vintage items in particular, because of the attention to detail. And I feel like a vintage person by even saying this, that items made now are certainly not as well crafted as they were. And I can say that as a fashion design major, a big part of the fashion design program is pattern making. So when I look at a piece, I am looking at the piece, the construction, the stitches per inch, it's a whole other process when I am shopping. So I gravitate more towards vintage items because of the delicacy and the attention to detail. Now, consignment. Now that I have started cappuccinos and consignment, and I have started the experiences rather, I have gotten a lot of questions with that, and if I don't receive questions, I can see it all over your face. When we go into these consignment shops and people have sticker shock, they're not the same. Thrifting is not the same as vintage, and vintage is not the same of consignment. So this is how I kind to keep the lines as solid as I can between the three. When I think of thrifting, I think of donation. When I think of consignment, I think of curation. So anyone, if you've been to a museum, you don't just hang pictures. There's an entire process where a curator selects the piece, and yeah, this is neither here nor there. I'm also an art history minor, so sorry. But anyway, with consignment, just as if you were going to a thrift store, you make an appointment, and with the appointments at the consignment shop, you are either meeting with a buyer, the owner, or a sales associate. And at the consignment shop, there is typically a very, very long list of what will be accepted and what's not. Just because you take items to a consignment store doesn't mean that it will be accepted. Again, thrift stores take what they can get. Consignment, you select what you want. And with that, the price tag. So thrifting, again, donation, consignment, curation. The curator, owner, sales associate will go through each item, determine if it fits the target market at this location, is it on trend, the quality, all of those things they go through with a fine-tooth comb, and that makes me sound vintage. But yes, these items are thoroughly inspected for quality, again, if it's on trend, and a host of other things. So with consignment, the prices will not always be less than what they were in the store. And I can associate this better with pre-loved bags. A lot of times when I am looking for pre-loved bags, and a lot of people have shared this with me, they look at the price and they'll say things such as, I might as well go to the Louis Vuitton store, or I might as well go to Chanel. Just because it's consigned doesn't mean you're going to save. That's a whole other thing with the whole money process. But yes, just because it's consigned does not mean that you are going to save. Case in point, if there is a purse, and I am using purses as an example because that's what I buy a lot from consignment shops. If there's a purse that is no longer in production and a consignment shop has it, you better believe it is going to be marked up much higher than it was at the actual shop. So that's just that. So with the difference, I try to remind myself: thrifting, donation, consignment, curation, and I still get tied between the two. And vintage is just anything prior, 20 years prior to the day. So right here I have 3 pieces from thrift shops, consignment shops, and vintage. The first, I got this piece, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago. When the husband and I were dating, we went to a consignment shop and he didn't know the difference. So when we walked in, I guess he thought it was a thrift store. And once we got to the register, he found out that it was not a thrift store. So I had explained to him the difference. And this piece is from the 40s. It is Danish mink. And the detail, I can zoom in later if anyone is interested, but it is absolutely amazing. Here we have a vintage item, and I got this from a vintage shop in San Francisco, the largest vintage shop I have ever seen. And I'm not a big vintage shopper, so I can't attest to what's locally or what's the biggest shop. Nonetheless, what I loved about this vintage shop, and this is the embarrassing moment I would share, I didn't know the difference between vintage and thrifting. So I went into this vintage shop with the notion that I was going to, come out with $6 dresses or $10 coats. And I was sticker shocked because I had no clue how expensive vintage items are. And with the shop in California, what I really, really like is that they have the store broken down by decade. And it makes it so much easier for you to know what decade your piece came from. Some things it's much easy to determine. If it's a flapper dress, it's from the 20s or 30s. If it's bell bottoms, 70s. But some things aren't quite as cut and dry. But I know that this is from the 70s. It is an Italian leather trench coat, and again, the detailing is like nothing I've seen in my time. Which is why I gravitate more towards 70s outerwear. And here is the last piece. This was thrifted, and I got this piece about, I want to say 2 months ago from a Goodwill. Very, very nice coat. Just because it's thrifted does not mean that it's inferior. It's just more of a hunt. You do have to search more when you are in thrift stores. This is a Gap Scottish wool blend coat, and it is phenomenal. I absolutely love it. And this piece was $6.99 because it was thrifted. So the thing with thrifting too, I don't want to, or rather I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that just because it's thrifted does not mean that it is inferior to consignment. There are a lot of times, and I know a lot of people may be creeped out about this, but a lot of times with thrift stores, if a family member has passed and the loved ones either don't have space or just cannot accommodate, don't have the time so much to go through every single piece, a lot of those items are just given to the thrift store, which is why I know I have found, again, furs, I have found leather, I have found suede, I have found amazing pieces at the thrift store. And since it was at the thrift store, the fur was marked maybe $30. The leather skirt was maybe 10 or so. Had those items been given or sold rather to a consignment shop, you better believe it would have been marked up at least 3 times as high. So you can get very, very nice pieces from a thrift store and for a much lower price. You just have to be willing to hunt. I hope that I did not confuse you any more than you were, if you were confused. And if you have any questions, please message me. I love talking about these kind of things because I am a thrifter at heart. I love consignment shops and I do love vintage. I don't have a preference between the three. Some people are loyal to whatever genre they're in. I have no loyalty to this. I do not. So yes, please let me know what you think. Let me know about your experience. And yeah, ciao for now.